The heart of the monarch stopped beating at the age of 96. Although it was inevitable, the whole world is now grieving with the British royals. Queen Elizabeth II lived an extraordinary life, full of ups and downs. From a young girl who didn't expect to be queen to an iconic figure who reigned for over 70 years. When Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was born, she had little chance of assuming the throne, until her uncle suddenly abdicated, forcing her family into the limelight. Elizabeth's father became king, and the 10-year-old girl became first in the line of succession. But it was a tumultuous time for the princess, and her life was far from a fairy tale. Only 3 years later, the Second World War broke out, and young Elizabeth had to start taking on some of the public duties. At age 14, she delivered the first of her radio broadcasts, addressing the children who had been evacuated from their homes.
To you living in new surroundings, we send a message of true sympathy.
During her speech, Elizabeth showed her calm and steadfast personality, and that was just the beginning of her lifelong service to her country. At 16, Princess Elizabeth was appointed Colonel of the Grenadier Guards. This meant she began to accompany her parents on official visits within Britain, and 2 years later, she made the decision to join the armed forces. Her father was strictly against it, but Elizabeth insisted, and after months of begging, the king gave in. During her time with the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the princess trained side by side with other British women to become an expert driver and mechanic. The newsreel of her driving a truck and fiddling with an engine showed Elizabeth's commitment to help in the war effort. Thankfully, the hostilities ended soon, and the princess didn't have to engage in warfare. On her 21st birthday, she broadcast another message to the nation, sharing her feelings and hopes for the future.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service.
Indeed, with her father's health declining, Elizabeth stepped in for him at various state functions. Sadly, King George VI succumbed to lung cancer at the age of 56, and his 25-year-old daughter ascended to the British throne, which came with its own set of trials. As a queen, Elizabeth II worked tirelessly to protect the image of the monarchy and prepare for its future. During her lifetime, the Queen witnessed her country and the world at large transform. And although she has always been synonymous with stability, she kept up with the pace. She embraced new changes like televising her coronation and establishing a tradition of annual Christmas broadcasts. Her Majesty also dropped some of the formalities and made certain sites and treasures more accessible to the public. And she became the most widely traveled head of state in history, visiting more than 100 countries across 6 continents. This garnered international attention and widespread respect for Britain and the monarch herself. She even embraced technology. The Queen sent her first email back in 1976. Next, she took to Twitter in 2014 and Instagram 5 years later. And her role as a humanitarian helped millions of people all over the world. Her Majesty was a patron of 600 charities and public service organizations. They covered a range of issues, from opportunities for young people to the preservation of wildlife and the environment. Even in her 90s, Queen Elizabeth remained loyal to her royal obligations. She continued working, doing more than 400 engagements per year. However, not everything went so smoothly in her private life. The year 1992 spelled disaster for the Queen. 3 of her children, Prince Charles, Prince Andrew, and Princess Anne, all experienced a breakdown in their marriages. It affected Her Majesty a lot, both as a mother and as a devoted Christian. On top of that, a fire broke out at her home, Windsor Castle, and destroyed a large part of it. 10 years later, Elizabeth II experienced an even greater tragedy. Sadly, she had to say goodbye to both her sister Margaret and her mother. Despite this, the Queen continued to stick to her very busy schedule, including official work and public appearances. So how did she endure it all? The answer is simple. She was blessed with someone who always had her back. Elizabeth first met her future husband, Philip Mountbatten, when she was only 13, and she was smitten with him from the start. The two kept in touch, and their relationship developed over the years. However, many in the royal circle, and more importantly King George VI, viewed Philip as an unwise match. But Elisabeth was determined and very much in love. So she and Philip wed in 1947 at Westminster Abbey. Her Majesty and the Duke of Edinburgh welcomed 4 children and were more than just a married couple. They were a team. In the Queen's own words, Philip was her strength and stay during her reign and offered her vital support. They were together for an incredible 73 years. Tragically, Prince Philip passed away in 2021, which was heartbreaking for the Queen, and unfortunately, that wasn't the last sad thing to happen to Her Majesty. Soon after the loss of her beloved husband, Prince Andrew became embroiled in a nasty scandal. As monarch, Elizabeth II had to strip her son of his military roles and even his Royal Highness title. Moreover, following his withdrawal from royal duties, the Queen's youngest grandson, Prince Harry, published a tell-all book that courted controversy. Amid all this turbulence, the Queen tested positive for COVID-19, and although she had a seemingly speedy recovery, it took a toll on Her Majesty's health in general. After her illness, she stepped back from many royal duties, handing them over instead to Prince Charles and the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. Still, Queen Elizabeth's popularity didn't wane. Britain celebrated her unprecedented Platinum Jubilee, which made her the country's longest reigning monarch. But even in her last days, Queen Elizabeth never lost her perseverance and sense of humor, and that's one more reason we'll always remember her so fondly. Throughout her 70-year reign, reports detailing her many jokes, quips, and astute remarks surfaced. One famous example is when she entertained the King of Saudi Arabia during his visit to Britain. At the time, women in his country were famously not allowed to drive. So, the Queen drove him round her Scottish estate herself in a beat-up Land Rover. On another occasion, she met some American tourists while walking the grounds of Balmoral with her bodyguard. When the tourists asked if she lived locally, she mentioned that she had a house nearby. And when asked if she'd ever met the Queen, she simply pointed at her security and said, "No, but he has." Her Majesty also had a sense of humor about her age, like during the Commonwealth Summit. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau delivered the toast to the Queen, honoring her more than 60 years on the throne, and her answer was simply amazing.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister of Canada, for making me feel so old.
Or when Northern Ireland's Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness asked the Queen if she was well, she didn't hesitate to quip.
Thank you very much. I'm still alive.
Queen Elizabeth definitely kept the promise she made at her coronation, to devote herself unfailingly to the well-being and safety of her people to her last breath. Rest in peace, Your Majesty.